Hello, and today we're going to talk about what is DNS and why does it matter. The story that I want to use for this of why it matters and understanding who your DNS provider is that we recently had a site on Saturday morning. I got my favorite thing in the entire world, which is what we call a code red at Business Tech Ninjas, where something has gone terribly wrong. Please help me now. And one of our clients had said, hey, my website is down. Now, the first problem that I encountered with this is that I went to the website and it was coming up just fine, which is the most challenging when you're troubleshooting of something, of when it's not consistently down, because it means that something I'm doing is different than what something that somebody else is doing, which means we need to figure out what that difference is. So then we went down the rabbit hole of checking the server and checking some other items, and it's like, well, why is this down? And what we eventually realized is that the DNS provider, which in this particular story is a company called 123 Registration, was intermittently down. And I was working with the support company on this, and they had kind of come back to me and they're like, hey, we checked the server and everything's running smoothly here. The issue appears to be related to DNS, which seems to be going on and off intermittently. Random. And then they gave me this great tool, which is called DNS Checker, which by far you should definitely read that if you use that down the road to see, okay, like, hey, is this good? Now, in this particular instance, we're now seeing that it's good, but I imagine that when they originally do this search, that they would see some X's here, which essentially means that the DNS is not sending to the right place. Now, what does this all mean to you? How is this even important? Think about DNS like okay, first of all, we need to step back and define like a website. So think of a website as a collection of files. It's HTML, images, videos that are stored on a server, which is kind of like a really special kind of computer that's always online when you visit a website. Your browser needs to figure out where those websites' files are stored and how to load them. To make this happen, the internet uses something called DNS, Domain Name System, which acts like a translator between those friendly website names like businesstechninjas.com and google.com and facebook.com and the computer-friendly IP addresses like 172.217.5.115, which tells your browser, hey, which files on the World Wide Web am I trying to access here? Think of it like when you're on your computer, when you go into that search bar of like trying to find a file like Melodie's latest hoop video, and it's the World Wide Web or Chrome or Firefox is trying to then pull up those files for that particular website. And when you have a DNS provider, which is usually your registrar, which is where you're going to go in and buy your domain name. So I had to buy businesstechninjas.com in order to be able to put my website on it. Then they usually will send they will usually set up the DNS for you. So in this particular instance, what we found is that 123 Reg, there was some sort of downtime with it. And it was not loading the site correctly. So just to kind of take a step back of like, there are different components to your site where you have your registrar, you have your email provider, you have your DNS provider, you have your hosting company, and you have your server, which is where the actual files are stored themselves. And a lot of the times the registrar where you actually put your domain name also is the DNS provider. Now, the suggestion that we got on this is that this should really be on Cloudflare. So in the instance when you use Cloudflare is that you'll have a registrar, which is like the company that you go in and you pay. It's usually between $10 and $20 a year or so for a domain name. And then instead of using that registrar, we use Namecheap quite commonly. Another really common one is GoDaddy. Then you would then point your domain name to Cloudflare, which basically says, hey, Cloudflare, I want you to tell people when they type in businesstechninjas.com where to go when they type in that particular URL. And that's your DNS provider here. And so this is a helpful tool here, this DNS checker, because it helps us to know, okay, hey, is this website accurate? So let's check out Business Tech Ninjas here. Hopefully my site's online because it's going to be real embarrassing otherwise. So it looks like all of my DNS records are pointing to the right place. So the DNS record for my site, I'm not quite sure why there's two of them, honestly, of why there's two DNS records. Hopefully it's something fancy and cool. This one's only got one in Russia. But it does show, what's the IP address. And when we're doing site transfers, when we're moving over sites, we'll be looking for this to make sure that all of the domain names have been updated here to the correct IP. Because when you're transferring a site from one server to another, you're actually changing the IP of that particular site. So that's another point of clarity of, like, when your site is hosted on like a server over here, but the thing to consider is that your hosting company probably doesn't actually own these servers. So if you use, let's say, like Bluehost or WP Engine or SiteGround or anything, they're buying space on servers somewhere, probably a large amount of space from a server company that specializes in that, and then reselling that to you. Think of it kind of like, a grocery store, where I'm going to the grocery store and buying bananas, but they didn't grow those bananas. They're just like allowing me to buy those bananas from them. Probably a better analogy would be maybe a co-working space or something, where they don't actually own that space necessarily, but they're allowing me to use that space in their leasing it from somebody else. So they're kind of like the middleman in that particular relationship. Um, Hopefully this has simplified DNS for you and not made it more confusing. If you do have any questions about, okay, hey, what is, I have further clarity that I want to understand on DNS and domain registration, then please comment below. Happy to answer your questions. Tech does not have to be so complicated, but oftentimes we do make it complicated. But once it's simple, it really allows us to grow and thrive in our businesses with a lot more ease.